Hello and welcome back to D6 Tabletop. In today's video, it's a 1,750 point tournament down at Bristol Independent Gaming in Bristol, and I brought my Necrons. So let's have a look at my list, have a look at Bristol Independent Gaming, and then get into the tournament.
First is the unit with the Overlord, a Technomancer, and a 10-man unit of Lich Guard. The Overlord has got a Res Orb, and he's got the enhancement giving him a 4-up Feel No Pain. The Res Orb allows them to reanimate in both my command phase and the opponent's. The Technomancer has got the enhancement giving the unit the benefits of stealth, so that's -1 to hit in range outside of 12, and the benefits of cover from the same attack outside of 12. Next up, we've got 2 units of warriors, 20 warriors in each. The first unit has got a Technomancer and a Lord with Res Orb, allowing him to reanimate, again in both command phases. The Technomancer giving that warrior unit a 5-up Feel No Pain. That unit's got the long range rifles, and then the second unit has got the short range rifles. And they've also got a Technomancer to give them a 5-up Feel No Pain, and a Lord with a Res Orb to bring them back at the start of each turn. A Technomancer has also got the Veil of Darkness, allowing me at the end of one of my opponent's fight phases to take them off the board and bring them back in my next turn as strategic reserves. Then of course we've got the Reanimator, because reanimating once is not good enough, so let's add extra dice into those reanimation rolls and keep getting them back on their feet. 3 units of Scarabs. These guys have got no OC, so they can't actually control objectives, but what they can do is do secondaries, and with their really low profile, meaning they won't get a lot of true line of sight, my main plan for these guys is to hide them around the board and use them for the cards so that I can still shoot and move the warrior units as normal. 2 Doomstalkers bring some big guns to the list. I need to have something with some long range shooting, otherwise there's not a lot of punch in this list at all, so at least 2 guns might be able to do something, or at least cause some kind of deterrent against the opposition to make them think before they just move their big tanks into the open. 3 Bikes bring some speed to the list. They've also got a scout move ability, and I've equipped them with the D6 weapons, making them pretty good against horde units and mass infantry. So they're going to be there for a bit of early game objective securing and secondaries, although they will probably ultimately die pretty fast because they haven't got much on their save value. And then finally, I had 30 points left. A Low Curse Destroyer is 30 points. He is there just to score some points on the board. I don't expect him to do anything. He was more of a case of a gap filler. So that's the list then. Before we get into the tournament, let's have a little look at Bristol Independent Gaming. Located on Cater Road on the outskirts of Bristol, this place is a great venue. It's got a shop attached to it selling 40k, Age of Sigmar, Star Wars, historical, Dungeons & Dragons, board games. There's loads of stuff here, and all your hobby supplies. It's got a best part of 20 or more tables. There's rooms at the back for D&D, and some fantastic terrain, as we will see as we go throughout this video. So without further ado, let's head on to Game 1. Game 1 then, I am playing Rob, and we are playing Hammer and Anvil, Delayed Reserves, and Sights of Power. Hammer and Anvil is a lengthways game, which I don't particularly like playing. I also find that this spaces the objectives out a bit further than I like, because I like to run my warrior blobs and my Lich Guard blobs up fast and sit on the objectives and hold them. I find with Hammer and Anvil and lengthways deployments in general, that extra bit of space between the objectives tends to make things a bit harder for me. Rob's brought his Chaos, and oh boy are they melee. He's got Possessed, he's got Chosen, he's got a lot of Chosen. He's got people hiding in the Land Raider, he's got Cultists, he's got Raptors. I think they're called Raptors, the Jump Pack boys. Either way, it's quite a heavy melee list, which is a bit of a challenge considering my list is, well, not so melee. In the early stages of the game, I managed to get my units up onto the objectives. Unfortunately, I couldn't capture the one on the far side of the board, as it was just too far away for me to get a unit there before Rob could get onto it, which left me with the ones in the bottom left corner, which are still 3 objectives, so I thought I'd be alright. Reanimator in the middle, trying to keep the blobs of warriors and Lich Guard alive. Problem is they are still quite more spaced out than I like to play. This meant that eventually Rob managed to pick off some of my units at the top end and then focus down the middle. Rob managed to take out one of my warrior blobs, including both the characters, quite early on in the game. Now with Sights of Power, you require a character on the objective to score you extra primary points. This is a problem because this means that I've lost 2 of my 6 characters, because they're all attached to units, meaning I had to abandon my home objective, which would have been extra Sights of Power points, to try and hold the No Ones and No Man's Land in the hope that the gamble would pay off in the fact that I could do extra secondaries that require me to be in no man's land to make up the difference in points that I'm losing from not being at home. However, this ended up with me just sticking my units too far out than what they could really handle and being swamped over by so much chaos and ultimately getting destroyed. I did manage to use my Veil of Darkness and get my warrior unit onto his home objective, making a lovely 9-inch charge. Slight problem is, once you take warriors out of range of a reanimator, they are quite squishy when you throw sheer buckets of melee attacks that the chaos can put against them. So small win for me for getting onto capture enemy outpost and scoring the points. However, I then lost the unit. But you know, little wins. During the mission Tempting Target, I selected the one in the middle with the Lich Guard on, hoping they were going to be hold on and stay throughout the turn, until they got absolutely rinsed by the Chosen, the Possessed, and anything else that could get thrown at them, including the kitchen sink. So that meant that I lost that entire unit, and then all Rob had to do was just focus down on one unit a turn, getting me off the objectives, and preventing me from scoring any points. Really good game. It was a hard game. And the sheer amount of melee in his army really came to see, as well as when his units have critical wounds on 5s and stuff like that. It's just a lot of anti-Necron, basically, because only with the feel no pains can I get back up, and with that many attacks and that many critical wounds, I can't make that many save rolls. Come the end of it, it was a final score of 98 to Rob, 46 to the Necrons. This makes me and Rob 1 for 1. Last time I played him, he brought his Knights and I won that game. So I'm looking forward to what happens in our third matchup, whatever armies they may be. And now we move on to Game 2. Going into Game 2 then, I'm playing Dan and his Astra Militarum. We're playing Dawn of War, Scorched Earth, and Scrambler Fields. Now at the start of the game when we discussed terrain before deployment, we said that everything that wasn't a piece of pipe or a small barrier would be classed as obscuring. This meant that all of our shooting was going to come down to a couple of narrow lanes and only a few tight avenues to get guns off. So, I suppose that's good for both of us. It means I'm only going to get tank fire in a few select spots, but it does mean that I'm going to get all the tank fire in a few select spots. He's got a Rogel Dawn, Lehman Russes, Cadian Shock Troops, Cassicans, some lady giving out orders, some bloke on a horse giving out orders, a few Sentinels, and some bloke named Gaunt and his ghosts. I didn't have too much to be worried about from Scrambler Fields. It basically limits where you can come back in on reserves or scout moves, and I only got one unit that can do both. My main aim going into this game was to get forward, secure objectives, hold them, and then as I go into the last couple of turns, start scorching them to score me that extra VP at the end of the game. Of course, I'd have to hold them for that long and hope for the best. This giant piece of terrain in the middle provided the perfect place to hide my Reanimator, so its center board allowing me to get the reanimation aura as much as possible through the width of the objectives. Now I think something that set Dan off on the back foot here was the first mission he drew for his secondaries was investigate signals, which means that he has to go into the back corners to do actions. At the end of the game we thought that it might have been better if he'd bin that one off, because what it did was it actually hampered his movement, making him move his army backwards rather than forwards, granting me more space to roam, allowing me to get up onto the objectives. Now he did a very good job of getting himself on the one at the far end with his Sentinels straight up on the scout moves and securing the objectives. However, that allowed me to get the other three, and once Necrons sit on an objective, it's usually pretty hard to shift them. Necrons have also got a nice little strat that as long as a model in the unit was destroyed by the opponent's shooting phase, I can pay a CP and return fire with that unit as if it was my shooting phase, but I can only target the unit that shot at them. This allowed me to get rid of a unit of Cadian Shock Troops and whittle it down so that it was just Ursula left out in the open when it came round to my actual turn, allowing me to get rid of her and clear most of the right flank in the early game, allowing me decent board control. And due to the terrain being what it was, having that corner control also pretty much allowed me to control the middle. He did try to make an advance through the middle with Gaunt's Ghosts and a few other units, but the Lich Guard pretty much saw them off, allowing me to hold on, keep good board control, and score my secondaries as I drew them, making the final score 97 to the Necrons, 22 to the Astra Militarum. It was a good fun game. Dan was a good player. I think it was one of his first tournaments, so it was nice to see new people on the scene and to get to meet new people whilst out and about. So I'm now 1 for 1, and we're going in to Game 3. Game 3 then, I'm playing Shane and the Astra Militarum again. We're playing Search and Destroy, The Ritual, and Chilling Reign. Chilling Reign means nothing, pretty much. It means there's nothing else in effect. The Ritual is an interesting one because it means that we have to spawn our own objectives during the game, so it makes a bit of a confusing mechanic, but it did play in my favour in this case. Shane's brought a list packing a Shadow Sword, I think it's a Shadow Sword, and a load of Chimeras, a lot of Kachachan, 2 of those artillery rocket things, I think they're called Wyverns, that dude on a horse again, and some Sentinels. This was a really tough game, and it really came down to the wire. I ended up going second, which meant I had to bear the brunt of the Astra Militarum shooting first up. That giant tank can just one-shot pretty much anything. As soon as it got a bead on one of my Doomstalkers, it was just gone. So I spent most of my game trying to hide the Doomstalker and the Reanimator from being shot at by that giant gun. We both suffered from terrible secondaries at the start of the turn. I don't think I actually scored a secondary point until about turn 3, due to the fact that I just couldn't complete any of them. Shane begun by getting rid of all of my Scarabs so I couldn't do secondary objectives, and then started focusing down on trying to pin me into my corner. Because I had managed to get into the centre and we were spawning objectives, we'd managed to spawn them really close to each other in that top end of the table. Due to the fact that I wasn't scoring any secondary objectives, I felt the only thing I could really do was try and push for the primary, so I moved my entire army forward, hid the Reanimator behind a piece of terrain, and put as many men onto objectives as I could, meaning that I had the higher OC and started to score primary points, whilst denying Shane being in the middle of that area. To counter this, he charged back in with his infantry and his vehicles to try and get OC on the objectives. What swung it for me is my reanimations. I can still reanimate onto the objectives without being within engagement of other units. Going into turn 5, it was anyone's game. Due to going second, it meant that I was scoring primary VP at the end of turn 5, which allowed me to reanimate at the start of the turn, meaning that when we came to score at the end, I had more OC on the objectives, allowing me to just get that extra VP for the primary. That, combined with being able to destroy one of his Chimeras on an objective to score me a secondary point as well, meant that I just took the game, with the final score being 55 to the Necrons, 52 to the Astra Militarum. This was a really hard game. It was such a tooth and nail one all the way through. It was a really good game and really hard won. It really was a case of me and Shane countering each other's movements, shooting and combat, and a few clutch rolls keeping us in the game. After that, it was time for trophies, prizes, and wooden spoons to be dealt out. You can see Rob here from Game 1 winning a prize for one of the clubs as well. So, as well as the main prizes here for the event, there was also a couple of clubs from Bristol at the same event, and they were handing out trophies to the winners from each of their teams, as it were, which is really cool to see. There was quite a big community going on down there. You can see Shane here from Game 3 handing out a trophy to another club member. My final placings for the day were 11th out of 26, so not bad, with 2 wins, 1 loss. I just couldn't score enough points to get me higher up the board. But it was a really good, fun day. Thank you to Bristol Independent Gaming for putting on the event and for having me down there. Thank you to all the people that I played. It was really enjoyable, and I'll be back to do more soon. If you like this kind of content, please consider liking the video. Drop a comment below whether you thought my list was good, whether you thought it was bad, or maybe some discussion from your recent tournament experiences. And as always, please consider subscribing to the channel. So until we see you on the next one, thank you for watching, take care, and we'll see you again.